This is Music for the Master, and I'm Kenneth Freeman. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for watching the first episode last week. So if you're back, great. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the questions. If you're brand new, welcome. Let's see what we can do today. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of an outline from the beginning of what we're going to do, organization. So I'll start with some question and answers. We're going to look at, later in a different segment, the difference between a lead sheet, Nashville numbers, and Roman numeral analysis, and all of their strengths and weaknesses, and which one you can use to help you most in the church setting. We're also I'm going to give you some tips about getting fuller sounds and some chord substitutions, and then of course I've got some review of resources for the church pianist. So let's get started with the questions. Two of the questions I got asked, one of them was, how can I change the sound of a hymn for a more sacred portion of the service? Whether it's the serving of communion or a prayer time, something that's a little more reverent and a little more relaxed. I think there's two things to remember in this. First of all, you have to know your instrument. Know its strengths and its weaknesses. What does it do well? What does it not do well? So if I had this beautiful Steinway in my local congregation, first of all, I'd be very, very happy because I know it's going to respond. But I have to know some things about it. So if I just play in different regions of the instrument, in the middle register, I like its warmth. I think it's kind of mellow and very simplistic, but the bass can get really powerful very quickly. And so I'm going to probably be careful in how much of that I use. I'll use it for color, but not for a lot of substance. Also on this instrument, the upper register is really, really bright, and it just cuts and carries. For me as a soloist, that's wonderful. But in a prayer time, that's probably not what I'm going to want. The second thing to remember is that sometimes less is more. So if I am playing for like a prayer time, or I'm underscoring the pastor's invitation time, and maybe I'm going to be using, maybe the worship minister is going to use a hymn like, let's see. Of course, when you need one, they just go away, right? They would use a hymn like Nothing But the Blood, okay? So when I'm playing the hymn, pretty active. For that invitation time, I might take some of those repeated notes out, and I may focus more on the chord progressions than on the actual tune itself. So something like, so I'm using lots of block chords with a little bit of melody, and just looking for the warmest sound that I can give. During a performance, I'm probably going to use more of the bass line to give a structure harmonically. I might use the upper register to really cut through and give a different tone sometimes, but in these more sacred times, find the warmth in your instrument, wherever it is, that allows you to remain mellow and underneath a speaker especially. Yeah, so I hope that helps. The other question was exactly what is an overchord? And I really scratched my head a little bit to figure out what's an overchord. So with a little bit of conversation back and forth, the questioner was talking about these chords that we see in lead sheets that are like D over F sharp or G over A. They're not two different chords, and that's a common misunderstanding. So D over F sharp does not mean D major over F sharp major. That would be a real mess. What these actually refer to at 90% of the times are inversions of chords. So a D chord in the D over F sharp is spelled D F sharp A. But because this chord is over F sharp, then we have an F sharp in the bass. And that's going to give me that right. Now, why would I use it? If I have something like D going to G, sorry, I need to just play a plain G chord there. Not so interesting. But by adding a D over F sharp before the G chord, then I can give that bass line a little interest. Listen again. D over F sharp to G. So that would be an inversion of a chord. So that chord's actually going to be in first inversion because the third of the chord is in the bass. Sometimes something like G over A, that's going to be an added tone. It's going to be a non-chord tone in the bass. So it's a G major chord over an A in the bass. This will come very commonly moving when we need 5 to 1 or 4 to 1, and we'll talk more about those chords later. But because both chords 4 and 5 move to 1, contemporary composers are finding that stacking them on top of each other like that, using the root of the 5 chord and the 4 chord, really pulls us to 1. So if we're in the key of D major, if I need to get back to D, then I can play G, which is the 4, over the root of the 5, which is A, and it pulls me a little bit further back. Okay? I hope that helps, guys. Keep sending your questions. They make my life a whole lot easier and give me lots of ideas of where we can talk. So in the next segment, we're going to look at the difference between lead sheets, Roman numerals, and Nashville numbers. See what we can learn together. Hi guys, if you knew how many times I've tried to record this segment, you would find it very funny. So I'm going to try to find it very funny as well and do it again. We are going to look at the difference between lead sheets, Nashville numbers, and Roman numeral analysis and how they're useful in the church. So let me share my screen really quickly, and we will see what we can do with this. So this is what we typically see in the church. So we have a lead sheet in the key of F major. We have a melody line with chords written over it, and then the lyrics below. So what we typically see is that the chord names, if they have nothing after them, then we know that we're dealing with a major chord, or we might have a minor chord, something ending with M-I-N, or maybe just a lowercase m. And the other common thing that we will see is diminished chords. with the DIM as a suffix, or you might see like a little degree sign written after the letter B. We've talked about these overchords already that indicate inversions. I'm going to sneeze, excuse me. Or maybe not. It'll probably come in a second. So yeah, this is what we're familiar with, so I'm not going to linger here a lot. What's wonderful about these is that lead sheets are very easy to play from. We know what the chord is, we just play what we see in front of our face. The problem becomes when we need to do it in a key other than what we've got written here. The only option we have is for someone, normally the pianist, to take that lead sheet and to frantically scratch out what's there, write in the new chords, make photocopies, and distribute the mess to everyone, hoping that they didn't make a mistake in the process and that everyone is now looking at the new lead sheet, not the old one. And because this doesn't tell us anything about relationships, it doesn't tell us anything about how chords are moving. Now, there is a second method known as Nashville numbers, which I hope you are seeing on your screen now. Let me raise that up a little bit. It's not a method that I am particularly familiar with. So I did some research and looked at Brian Wall's YouTube tutorials. His page is called Worship Tutorials. And he explains in detail how this system works. So really quickly, what the assumption is that the player knows how to spell the diatonic scale. So in F major, they would know 1 is F, 2 is G, 3 is A, 4 is B flat, etc. And so now the numbers correspond to those scale degrees. So for instance, the 4 that we see here at the beginning of the second bar, F, G, A, B flat. So it's going to be a B flat chord, and the player just knows that the 4 chord is major, in a major key. When they get here to the 6th chord, they know it's D, and they just happen to know that D is a minor chord. This works fairly well because now if I need to transpose this, I can just think of the new scale and read through it. What I personally find a little frustrating is that these numbers that just stand alone don't give me any kind of information as to their qualities. Are they major? Are they minor? Are they diminished? The only way I get any indication is if something changes diatonically. So here at the end of the first line, we see 2 major. That's because the 2 chord is actually a minor chord in a major key. And so this tells me I need to play that major chord. And I'm not even going to talk about why this sharp 4 diminished just kind of freaks me out. That's a lot of information to take in quickly, especially if I'm trying to transpose. There is another method, which is Roman numeral analysis. And this is the method that I am honestly most familiar with and that I am the biggest proponent of. And here's why. It uses the same assumption that Nashville numbers does, that the player knows the scale and is able to work through this. But instead of using just regular numbers, we use Roman numerals. And these Roman numerals carry information with them, whether they're capital letters, so like the capital 1, the capital 4, the capital 5 that we're going to see here on the second line. And capital letters always indicate major chords. And so it just reinforces for me that I don't really have to think whether I need a major or minor chord. I see it and I know it. Lowercase, as in the 6th chord, and then this minor 2 that begins the second line are minors. In the event that you're going to have a 5 standing alone, a lot of times composers will put dots over each leg of the V, just so you know. These numbers that follow some of these, so for instance, the 165, these all tell me things about what inversion this chord is in. 6 is going to be the most common one to follow something, as in this 1-6 here, which is a first inversion chord. So the third or the middle note of the chord is on the bottom. Here we have a 1-6-4, which is second inversion. So the top note of that root position chord is in the bottom. 6-5 and 4-3 and 4-2 you'll also see. Those are inversions of 7th chords. The nice thing about this is that even if I don't really realize very quickly what these extra superscripts mean in these chords, just by following where things are going, so I'm moving from the 1 through this inverted chord to a 4, so I'm moving from F to B flat, I can pretty much guess that I'm going to put the A in the bass to have that movement. We do get some strange looking chords like this, a diminished 7 of 5. What I like about that is it gives me fair warning that this chord is outside of the key. It's not diatonic, it's not something in the key, something's been altered. So what this actually says here is the bottom number, the 5, is the key that we're thinking in. So we know in F major, the 5 chord is C, which then means the 7 fully diminished chord in C major would be a B diminished chord. And that makes sense because that's what I've already seen above. But now I can take this information, transpose from key to key, carrying more information with me rather than having to rely on my memory just from these numbers. So what we saw in Nashville numbers with just the numbers, numerals 1, 2, 3, 4, is actually a shorthand that some untrained musicians in the 1950s used in the studio to give this information, but they didn't realize that they were missing some of the information along the way. So that's what we have with these 3 systems. I hope you will consider playing around with one that you're not familiar with. It may be something that is really, really useful in your ministry and in your work, especially if someone comes in with a cold unexpectedly and needs to sing something a third down. The less work we have to do making changes on the fly, the more time we have to actually practice in the new key, which is what we all want to do anyway. I'll see you in the next segment. I wanted to give you a couple of quick tips about one thing about actually playing and another about some of the chord progressions you can use. One of the things that I see most commonly in church pianists is this kind of playing. Everything is very much just at the surface, and we're just barely even playing. More than anything, it almost feels as though we're trying to play a typewriter. That's bad on the hands, actually, because by doing this type of work, you're engaging all of the tendons through the arm, and that's dangerous for us as repetitive stress injuries. Instead of thinking this way, we want to think of the entire arm all the way back to the elbow and even up to the shoulder as a single unit. And rather than just playing here at the surface, imagine that the key goes all the way down into the well, this part down here that you can't see. It would be this part. Imagine that you're playing down here, deeply in. So part of what I recommend is, as often as possible, to get a fuller sound, give bigger drops into the keyboard. It's more than just a louder sound, but it allows the instrument to speak more fully. And it takes more of the pressure off of this part of the hand and puts it into this meatier part that can handle more. So as often as I can, fall from the wrist straight down. So even in something like... So that's the first tip. The second tip, I want to go back to the hymns that we just looked at in the lead sheets and Nashville numbers. This chorus of the hymn Wonderful Peace, we can play very simply with just 1, 4, and 5. So in F major, it would be F, the 1, B flat, which is 4, back to F, to 5, which is C, F, the 1, 4, B flat, 1, 5, back to 1. So we discussed how there are what we call diatonic chords built upon each of those scale degrees. Diatonically, in a major key, there are 3 minor triads. They're built on 2, 3, and 6. Let's talk about 6 first. So the D minor chord, D, F, A, shares 2 notes in common with the 1 chord, with the F chord. You see how that works? And so because those 2 pitches, those 2 chords have 2 common pitches, we can substitute them very often. Now, you're going to want to establish your key first. So I might do something like... And instead of staying in 1, I can add a minor 6. And that gives me a little more interest. Now, you can tell I'm having to fight really hard to just play that simply. The other thing that I can do is I can add a minor 2. Because the 2 typically is going to go to 5. So, there where I did coming down with the minor 6, it's leading to the 5 chord, right? It's leading to C. So I can add a minor 2 before that. I would delay it. It gives a nice sound. If I'm going to add a minor 2, there's a very good chance that I can add a major 2. music theorists around the world are rolling in their grave. It's normally called a 5 of 5, but we're not going to get into secondary dominants yet. So a major 2. So I could then do D minor to G major to G minor back to C. Now coming from here, while I'm at the 5, I could even have a minor 5. I love this diminished chord. It's a 7 diminished to 5, so it's a B minor diminished chord, but I just think it works so well there. So, that's one way I can begin to spice up a little bit, adding 6 in place of 1 sometimes, a minor 2 as a precursor to a major 5. If I can put in a minor 2, I can probably put in a major 2 as well. And this all depends upon your ear and what it likes. The other things that I like to do is to just invert chords. So rather than playing everything in root position, I can add some interest in the bass line. Especially in those places where a chord is going to be around for a long time. It's an easy way to flip and to give us some movement to the chord we need. The other thing that I do to fill in my chords a little bit is instead of just playing a regular triad, so there FAC, I will add the second. It's a non-chord tone, but it gives me a little bit more color to the chord. So then if I add those, there's another one, and another, I can add a scale here. There's another 2. There's another one. So just look for places to add. Much of the time, it's simply playing around and seeing what you can get in and what you like to get in. There are no right or wrong answers. Have fun and make your playing fuller by the day. It's turned out to be a warm May 1st here in Texas. The heat's at about 92 degrees outside as I'm recording this, so excuse the t-shirt, but I need to survive. So the resource that we want to look at this week comes from Alfred Music. It's part of their Sacred Performer collection, and it's called In the Light of His Glory. And it's a set of arrangements by Martha Mier. If you have taught piano for any length of time, you've probably run across Martha's arrangements and Martha's name on several things. She does a lot just in general piano pedagogy. This is one of the first times I've run across her solo arrangements, and what I found, she lists them as late intermediate to early advanced. There are a couple of moments where, yes, it bears on that early advance, but I think you're going to find that most of these are in that early intermediate level. The songs included are Amazing Grace, His Eye is on the Sparrow, In the Garden, It Is Well With My Soul, Jesus Loves Me, Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee, Morning is Broken, My Jesus, I Love Thee, Near to the Heart of God, This Is My Father's World, Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus, and What a Friend We Have in Jesus. So several really familiar hymns that we know and our congregation is going to know. These are set in a very melody-forward manner, so your audience isn't going to have a difficult time finding this and finding the melody. Generally, I don't find these to be pieces that I want to play as part of a special service or of an offertory, but I do think that there's something that you could use to even sight read some things if you needed something for a prelude and maybe the organist or whoever that you normally work with wasn't there and it was just you, and so you needed to do something a little fuller without causing yourself too much stress. I have recorded several of these on my personal YouTube channel and have built a playlist that's linked down below in the comments, so you can review those there. Those are going to be the arrangements of Morning is Broken, Near to the Heart of God, This Is My Father's World, and Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus. The Near to the Heart of God and Morning is Broken are really quite nice. Let me give you an idea of some of the style. This is from His Eye is on the Sparrow. On and on, you get the idea. The other one that I want to point out to you, It Is Well With My Soul, is a really, really nice arrangement. I don't record it because I have several of them already recorded that I like better, but that would be one I would easily jump to. The Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee looked really promising. When you look into it, you see that there's lots of arpeggiated movements, there's some runs. It looked nice, and then I began playing it, and it takes the theme, or it's a spin-off, is a better way of saying this, of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. And then she begins the main theme. And then she shifts modes. It has some charming moments, but personally, I can't get past the lyrics, Joyful, joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, Lord of love, set in a minor mode. It's just a little too much for me. So this is a set that I will use more often in my private teaching, or if I get a last-minute call where I need to pull something together in a couple of days to play, or if I'm recovering from an injury or a lot of playing, and I'm just a little too tired to do anything, this might be a resource I will look to, but it won't be something that'll be in my regular circuit of offertories. I've got a couple of new books coming in. I've heard your cries that you need to find some things that are more appropriate for blended services that uses both contemporary praise and worship songs, as well as traditional hymns. So we've got some of those on the way. We'll take a look at what I've got in my library as well, and see if we can give you more help.